Today, let's talk about academic freedom. The question is, how free should members of a university community be? Well, members of a university community, that would include students and professors and administrators and cafeteria staff and secretaries in the department. I'm going to talk just about professors today. I think we should also talk about academic freedom for students, but we'll leave that for another day. I think many of the same principles will apply. So let's talk about academic freedom for professors. So how free should professors be? Free from what? Free from institutional sanction and free from the threat of institutional sanction. Institutional sanctions include such things as reprimands, warnings, being suspended with pay, being suspended without pay, being fired, also being removed from a course. Someone else takes over that course, or a parallel course is set up. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it happens occasionally that a professor will, that administration will set up a parallel course for a professor who's proved unpopular with some students or with the public. Students who would rather be with another professor then may go to the class with the other professor. Sometimes a professor is prohibited from teaching or prohibited from teaching at a particular level or prohibited from teaching a sort of course. There's also denial of tenure or denial of promotion. Occasionally a lab would be closed or a research project derailed. So these are forms of institutional sanction that university administrators have applied to professors in the past. There are informal sanctions that I want to mention as well, informal sanctions from colleagues and others in the university community. For instance, giving a professor the cold shoulder, making that professor's life difficult or worse, even miserable. So why institutional sanctions? Why would institutions and informal sanctions, why would people have reason to try to penalize other people, professors? Well, it's a good way to stop behavior, right? A penalty can deter others from doing it. It can prevent one from doing it again. It can stop the behavior right away. Maybe the sanction, the penalty, is a way of reforming the miscreant professor, or it could even be a form of retribution. Retribution is the idea that someone deserves some bad treatment or punishment just because they've violated some rule. So free from what? Well, free from institutional sanction and threat of sanction. Now, threat of sanction is all that's necessary, but there is no threat unless the people who can sanction you are willing to carry it out. Free from sanction in what occupations? Doing what? What is the professor doing where the professor should be or perhaps shouldn't be free from institutional sanction or informal sanction? Research, for sure. Research, conducting research into the ways of the world, thinking about things, writing about things, expressing opinions about the conclusions one has drawn. Another occupation is teaching, service, expression, saying things on one's own time or saying things in the classroom, criticizing one's institution. And then political endeavor, outside of university hours, perhaps in the hallways, engaging in political speech or political action. Association, whom the professor associates with, within hobbies or outside employment or recreation. These are all things that professors engage in. All things that where they might say or do something that upsets, offends someone, or violates some rule and might be subject to sanction for having done so. And as I mentioned, sanctions and the threat of sanctions are useful to keep people in line. And all institutions need rules and they need codes. And these rules and codes need to be backed by threat of sanction if they're to work. Rules and codes are necessary to the mission of the institution. So our question is just where should these rules and regulations and sanctions come in? How free from the threat of sanction should professors be? Well, we have to ask that given the academic mission of the university, or at any rate, given some values. How free should a professor be given the academic mission of the university or given some non-academic mission or whatever? What is the academic mission of a university? As I mentioned, people who value intellectual and moral autonomy, their own intellectual and moral autonomy, and the intellectual and moral autonomy of others, and who like to think hard about difficult matters, who like to think hard about difficult matters just for the sake of thinking hard about those difficult matters, might want to come together in groups and think hard about difficult matters in community with others. They're attempting to understand things, and they're attempting to help others understand things, and we might call that teaching. Their culture will be a culture of disputation and critical discussion, because disputation and critical discussion are means by which one can evaluate claims and investigate the world and come to try to understand it. So if the academic mission is to think hard in community about difficult things and to honor each other's intellectual and moral autonomy, we're not going to want to bring pressures on our thinking or on our valuing other than the pressures of evidence and argument. Yes, university people try to change each other's minds and try to get each other to feel and value differently than they do. But because they value intellectual and moral autonomy, they're going to restrict their attempts to change people's minds to evidence and argument. A person committed to the academic mission will not seek to change people's minds or values through the threat of sanction. A community committed to the academic mission will be one in which people are free to research what they want, how they want to, teach what they want, how they want to, and say what they want, how they want to, and so on. So if our university is one that people at the university are committed to the academic mission, then the people in that institution, the professors in that institution, will enjoy robust academic freedom. They will feel themselves free from the threat of sanction when they go about researching, when they go about teaching, when they go about discussing matters in public, political activity, their recreation, and the like. Now, I want to pause for a moment because I think there's a misconception of the academic mission, especially when people are talking about academic freedom. And I want to explain that misconception. On this misconception, professors might not enjoy robust academic freedom. There might be areas where they can be sanctioned for what they say, for their teaching methods and the like. This is the idea that the university must enforce the current standards and results of the discipline. So the idea is that disciplinary norms, disciplinary standards are in place and must be protected, and one way to protect them is to sanction those who would violate them. The goal then is to protect the knowledge that has been gained so far, protect it from being lost. Say the flat earth theorist in the geography department, protect from what havoc such an academic might play. But the problem with this way of thinking of the academic mission, to protect the knowledge that we've gained so far and to extend from there by enforcing the current standards in a discipline, is that the standards of the discipline and the results, they themselves are proper objects of criticism and dissent. We don't want to know what is true relative to some set of norms or some set of standards. We want to know what is true on its own, in itself. And so to think of the academic mission as constrained by the current standards, practices in a discipline is to constrain that academic mission and potentially keep it from reaching full understanding. But that aside, we do have to talk about the distinction between the ideal and the real. I mean, what I've described so far is an institution where people are committed to the academic mission. They're committed to intellectual and moral autonomy, their own and that of others. And as such, they're not going to apply sanctions against each other or pressures other than the pressures of evidence and argument. That academic freedom then would be the ethos in such an academic university. It wouldn't be a policy. It wouldn't have to be protected by a union. But in the real world, academic freedom is a policy. It's protected legally, it's defended or not defended by faculty unions and others. Professors, in fact, are free only so far as their collective agreement says, and as the union and as the institution allows. So there are pressures against academic freedom. There are pressures against leaving professors free from the threat of sanction. What are these pressures? Well, the values, the ideals, and the commitments of the administrators. One source of pressure for sanction against professors who step out of line If the administrators value things above the academic mission, then the professors at that institution will not enjoy robust academic freedom. They must keep themselves inside the lines drawn by these other values. There are also the values of groups outside the university. Government, for sure. Government wants things from the university and may try to influence, pressure the university to serve it, to serve the things that the government wants, and that might require putting pressure on certain professors not to engage in some fields of research, not to say certain things, not to teach in particular ways. But other groups, businesses, certainly activist groups, take for instance abortion. Suppose there's a professor who argues that abortion rights ought to be curtailed. Well, that could potentially put at risk a valued institution within our society. And it might be to the benefit of these groups that this professor is sanctioned or otherwise disciplined for expressing these ideas. So these are places where pressures from outside the university come to bear on administrators who then might deny the academic freedom of the professors. Also, the values, the ideas, the ideals and commitments of students and of other professors can impose threats of sanction on professors. Now, universities do need to exist in the real world. They need to exist in a world where there are pressures on them from other institutions and people outside the university and people inside the university as well. And sometimes universities will have to make compromises in order to maintain the flow of money and the respect of the community and the rest that the university needs to function. But academic freedom suffers most when university administrators value other things above academic freedom, above the academic mission, and then don't see the compromise as a compromise, but see it as part of what the university should be. Universities need to explain the academic mission more clearly and more comprehensively to the general public so that people will understand how a culture of freedom serves social goals. The last question I want to address then is, well, if we have a university where the professors enjoy robust academic freedom, where they're not at threat of sanction for what they say, for how they teach, for the directions their research goes, for the political activity they undertake in their off hours, for whatever their recreational pursuits might be. If they're free to teach, research, and speak as they wish without fear of institutional sanction, then how are we going to deal with the bad professors? Occasionally there are incompetent professors, there are professors who are snotty towards students or otherwise need to be dealt with one way or another. And if we don't have the threat of sanction to deal with them, then what are we going to do? Criticism. Criticism is central to the academic mission, and anyone at a university should be free to criticize publicly what's happening. Criticism of a professor's research, criticism of the nature of that research, of the direction of that research, criticism of the professor's teaching, of the professor's behavior towards students and colleagues. All of that can be used to help reform the bad professor, or give the supposedly bad professor a reason for an opportunity to explain why this way of going about research or teaching or whatever isn't bad. But we also need formal procedures as well. Formally, that is, when a dean receives accusations of incompetence, these are credible accusations of incompetence, what is to be done? Well, impanel a set of professors, 3 or 4 professors, to make recommendations and then set a timetable. So I think that the university's mission contains the possibility of addressing the problems, many of the problems that those who would curtail academic freedom think can't be solved with robust academic freedom. We may maintain robust academic freedom for professors at an institution, so long as people are willing to give criticism and to listen to criticism.